Hi, it's Lisa Wandl here, CEO of Coaching Australia and Coach Global. And during this such unique, incredible and definitely challenging times, we thought it'd be a great opportunity to connect with some of our incredible team that we have across Coaching Australia and Coach Global. And also a great opportunity, particularly to catch Vashti Whitfield, who I've been working with for about 20 years now. And she's an incredible woman, incredible coach, incredible trainer, working globally. So just the fact that we can catch her at the moment, I thought it was a great opportunity to understand from her perspective what she's seeing when she's working with executives and leaders, and perhaps bring some tips and ideas to either our emerging coaches or to leaders themselves as to how they might deal with some of the challenges that we're seeing right now. So a very big warm welcome to you, Vashti. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I actually love two things that I'd like to acknowledge. One, how incredible everything is. I loved your use of the word incredible there, and I like being described as incredible. That's fantastic. And I also love the fact that you said it's amazing to be able to pin me down, because I'm in isolation. So anybody that wants to grab me can grab me now, because I'm not anywhere.
Absolutely. So, and I know so much for you, so much of your work has been around resilience. You personally have seen so many ups and downs through life, as I know many of us have. But, I'm really curious to hear from you. What are you seeing in these times in terms of what's happening, the changes, the challenges that people are facing?
It's an interesting question and a vast area to explore. And given our time that we have together, I think I'll refine it to the thing that's most pertinent to me. Having to work remotely would be the number one fact that I'm noticing. I'm observing leaders who are having to completely diversify their leadership styles. I'm seeing teams that are having to not only facilitate their workload, but also perhaps even completely upskill in their communication ability. Let's say, for example, the introvert trying to be pertinent and present on a Zoom call, or somebody who is facilitating two vast, large teams where perhaps English is also a second language, and how to facilitate that remotely. So what I'm seeing is adaptation at its fastest and its finest. And I'm also seeing the need for adaptation crumbling in a big fat mess here and there and everywhere, and the support that those leaders and those teams need to evolve and diversify their capabilities.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've noticed as well. As you said, this need to be agile, the need to maybe shift how we've always been as leaders and how we've been operating as leaders as well. I had recent conversations with some leaders about exactly that fact, the fact that they said in some ways it's actually forced them to be differently, think differently, and definitely connect differently, I'd say as well.
And I think there's benefit in that. I call myself, the master reframer. I can always reframe anything into, I don't like to call it a positive spin, but the tremendous gain that can come with dealing with challenge. And I observe, as you so poignantly put it, I observe leaders learning skills that perhaps they didn't know that they had, partly because they've had to evolve. So, for example, if you have a very directive style leader who is suddenly having to manage and facilitate people who are quite literally experiencing a global grief or a global loss, or simply the lack of social connection, those leaders are having to plug into a level of empathy, a level of compassion, a level of connection that usually it doesn't come into their bandwidth. And that in itself is part of the coaching process that I myself have found it not only incredibly rewarding, but almost transformational, seeing individuals find a much deeper connection, for want of a better word, with their team because of harnessing a great level of empathy, perhaps that they thought they had, but they now have, in a whole new level.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, isn't it? I just think there's so many great things that are going to come out of this pandemic. As you said, the fact that leaders are almost forced into that transformation. And I was actually talking to a leader just recently, and we were in a coach training situation where she's learning coaching skills as a leader. And she said, well, basically, I've become convinced about how beneficial coaching is and how much I need to empower, because I've just had to you know, and like the coaching skills are coming in almost as a secondary piece to it, but she's actually seeing people operate really quite well independently and seeing the benefit and empowerment because it's almost been forced upon her. So it's actually been quite fascinating. Now she's going, and those coaching skills are going to be brilliant as well.
And I would say also, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, the flip side of that is you've got these tremendous people, really agile in their capability of resolving situations and challenges and problems and nurturing their team and thinking on their feet in terms of how to react in dealing with such challenge. And yet what they're not always doing is actually taking care of their own well-being. So I'm also seeing on the flip side tremendous burnout that is not sustainable. You know, those people who are not able, through perhaps also juggling their own families, homeschooling going on all around them, yeah, particularly, and I don't want to bring point to it, but particularly for female leaders who are trying to homeschool, trying to manage a global network, so on calls very late at night, trying to keep the home stable, and that's just not specific to gender. So there's all of a sudden the expectation to maintain, if not advance the workload, and yet still throw all these other things in the mix. I was talking to a client recently who has a very new baby and so is sleep deprived whilst juggling a little infant crying at home, putting lipstick on, trying to sound professional on a board. And you know, that is a really, really challenging on the nervous system, emotionally, psychologically. So from a coaching perspective, I'm also seeing that, you know, in terms of self-care, we're having to go back to basics, making sure that we're actually taking care of ourselves in order to facilitate the different hats that we're wearing.
Yeah, as you said, that definitely forms the foundation probably more importantly than any other time, so that we actually can give from that space of actually having, I guess, a solid base to work from. And there is so many demands pulling in so many ways. So in that space, what are the tips, the tools, the ways that you've been approaching that, you know, as such a successful coach?
I don't know. It's interesting. I do know, sorry. What I was going to say, I don't know about the word successful coach, but what I do know is that there's never been a more important time for an individual to be able to connect with another resource and support structure like a coach. So somebody that can hear them for the challenges that are going on in their work life and the crisis and their need to solve multiple problems, but also then how, if they have other roles in their life, how they juggle those as well. So what I'm noticing in terms of tips more than anything is sharing very fundamental, basic reminders of what is important in terms of self-care, or what are the core values that are demonstrated by you as a leader that you need to really maintain and harness in the workplace. Because when we are giving a tremendous amount of output, we can tend to forget what our unique strengths are. We tend to forget what our clear boundaries are. So an example of that would be something I've been using, which I'm sure you're aware of, is the study done by Gallup, which was all about the key values most sought after by, I think, approximately 10,000 workers that they interviewed. And those 4 key values were hope, compassion, stability, and trust. So just reminding individuals of what are those values in terms of that individual. How do they show up as a leader providing that set of values that's unique to them? You know, and making sure that they remember as they pivot and as they use their agility, which are the buzzwords of the moment, that they actually remember what are their unique values and their style of leadership, and where might they be a little bit out of alignment in stretching a little bit too far, or perhaps being a little bit fearful of the situation. So working very specifically with core values, key strengths, and really anchoring in what those are to determine your response to almost every situation. You know, how you're dealing with an incredibly challenged team, to how you're dealing with an incredibly challenged set of 3 children, one perhaps with learning difficulties. Because after all, what the current chapter is bringing forward is we are just all human beings trying to get through this as best we can. And so it's an important reminder to give people, or give my clients, certainly the tips and the tools to connect with how to be most efficient and present as a family member, but also how to do the same and honor your unique leadership style in the workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as you were speaking through that, Vashti, the word that kept popping in my head was human. You know, so many of those words you talk about hope and compassion and stability, etc. So they're such human terms. We talk about values. They're such personal ideals. You know, what's really important to us. And I think, you know, I often said to people, I think of coaching as being, you know, I often say to someone that coaching is like getting off the treadmill. So I get a chance to actually stop and look around and reflect and think about what's truly important, and really making decisions about where do you want to go, how do you want to be. And I feel like the whole world is in a massive coaching session right now. Like, it's an incredible space where the whole world is getting this chance to actually slow down, reflect, find out things that are really important, make decisions about who they want to be, etc., and go forward from there. So I think, you know, as you were saying, from a coaching perspective, or whether you're as a leader connecting with your team as well, how can we be more human? How can we really help the people in front of us, but also ourselves, to stop and reflect and decide what is really important and how they want to go forward?
Absolutely. And one of the other key pieces I'd love to share with you is I'm seeing with and my clients and the organizations I'm working with in full transparency, where as a culture, even, or perhaps as a leader, we tend to inspire in a way that is based on threat and fear and problem solving, which isn't necessarily negative. If we don't do that, this will happen. You know, if we will have to stand down, versus the opposite, which is much more, versus the limbic system style of thinking, much more that prefrontal possibility thinking mindset, versus challenge and opportunity. And so what I'm seeing is those that have a tendency to operate themselves more in fear-based thinking versus that optimistic, opportunistic mindset, they're tending to lead that way. And so what we then see on this side is people reacting out of fear. And from a nervous system perspective, we then go into threat, which is complete flight or fight. And that, again, is not sustainable. That cultivates anxiety, that cultivates depression, that cultivates extreme stress and burnout. However, if as a leader and or as a culture, we're able to operate from a perspective of reframing the challenge into an opportunity, from a nervous system perspective, we're able to experience that as challenge, as something to aspire to optimistically. And so what I'm noticing distinctly is an awareness growing of, isn't that interesting? I actually operate myself much more in under threat rather than challenge and opportunity. One, it might be terrifying, but exciting. One is just fear-based. And that has an incredible effect on our nervous system, our health, our gut, our sleep, and ultimately our performance. And so we need to be mindful if we are feeling those things. What I'm noticing with my clients is working with them on how to shift them from threat to challenge. And that simple reframe actually takes a considerable amount of work, in terms of working with breath, in terms of working with mindset, and in terms of working with a daily structure and routines that help to take you from threat to challenge and opportunity.
Absolutely. I think, and just, there's kind of a duality there as well, isn't there? The fact that, as you said, working with them so that they're in a better space, so that they can be more creative, be working and more, I guess, able to think from a broader sense of what will take them forward, what will be the best options to move forward, etc. But also from their team's perspective, as you said, if they're operating from threat, there's a very good chance that that's pervading and impacting the people that they're working with. So putting them under threat as well, and creating, you know, that ongoing rhythm of threat. And then, as you said, underperformance, it comes because people can't think as openly and freely and be as creative, which is exactly what we need at the moment. Not to mention the fact that people, of course, want to feel safe. So the psychological safety of having a leader that is coming from, as you said, that opportunity, that creativity, that forward focus. In coaching, we talk about being very solution focused. So really inviting them from that neuroscience perspective in a settled way, for their brain to be able to optimally opt in but also to feel safe enough so that they can actually do that really, really effectively. So what are people doing? What are leaders doing? How are we operating even at home, to actually make the people around us feel safe, feel comfortable, so that they can be open, they can share all those things you talked about, people that have got so many challenges at the moment. So again, we can connect as human beings.
Absolutely. And I think it's just important, though, and I know we're coming close to our time, to just reassure those who have a tendency to be the rescuers, to be the problem solvers, to facilitate safety doesn't mean giving reassurance that you are either A, not clear on, and or manufacturing to make somebody feel better. It's more about safety, creating trust. So how can we create a sense of trust that you are delivering stability in the information you're sharing, how you're showing up, maybe even being more vulnerable than you are usually. I was sent a video from one of my clients who potentially was responsible. It's a SME business, and they were unfortunately looking to stand down a considerable number of individuals. That has since changed because of their fantastic leadership. But he actually sent out a video to his vast staff where he talked about the situation, what stage A would be, and if that didn't work, they would go to stage B and then stage C. And during one of the parts of the video, he starts to shed, a big, strong, burly man, and he starts to shed a tear. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." But in that, and he wasn't going to send it, and we talked about it, and he sent it out there anyway, because what he was saying was so important, but also who he was being, authentically strong, but also sharing his grief and his loss for the situation, which was resolved anyway, was so pertinent and powerful, and created, as you're talking about, Lisa, that psychological safety and trust. Despite possibly the inevitable happening, it created a collaboration and a collaborative feeling despite challenge being on the horizon.
Yeah, so the power of being human, and the authenticity that comes through and makes such a difference. And I think, again, I think that's one of the fantastic things that's coming out of this particular interesting situation that we're in is, and we spoke about it just before, is just that authenticity, the fact that people can be more real, can connect differently, in such a much more positive way. There's so much possibility ahead. And I guess so much of that will come down to how well we leverage it as individuals, and living really consciously how we want to be, who we want to be, and how we want to lead as well. So thank you, Vashti. It's always so insightful to catch up. Love a chance to catch up anytime, as you know, and really hoping that, that supports maybe yourself as a leader or potentially as a coach, about navigating, again, these really interesting, challenging and times that we keep saying we're all in it together. We most definitely are. And I'm so looking forward to being out on the other side. Thanks so much.
Thank you.